For a long time, people have referred to Daniel Radcliffe as one of Britain's great young actors. I think tonight it's fitting to welcome him as one of the world's great actors. Please welcome Daniel Radcliffe.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just for the record, I'm going to keep this here, not because I'm checking my emails, but to monitor our time, because I know we're on a bit of a schedule. But first of all, thank you so much for fitting us in. I know, first of all, you've had a pretty packed schedule, 8 shows a week, and you're a little under the weather, so it's particularly nice of you to fit us in. So,
thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for having me. I'll use the mic since it's here.
I think to begin with, just an interesting question that I'm sure everybody wonders is, where did it all begin for you? Just where were you born, where were you raised? What sort of a childhood before this all hit did you have?
I grew up in Fulham, southwest London. To my mum and dad, who are also here. I had a very, very happy childhood. I wasn't particularly good at school. I mean, in terms of the work I produced, I was very, very talkative, and I would, that was pretty much what all the reports said, was we like Dan, but he's crap at the work and he talks too much. So that was it, really, and I didn't ever, I was never in a school play. I recently read on my own IMDb page that I apparently wanted to be an actor from the age of 5, which I don't recall being true. I think I turned round to my mum when I was 5 and said, I want to be an actor, but I was 5. My opinion on what I wanted to be changed hourly. So it was never something that I was driven towards. And there was one point when I was sort of 10, I was younger, I was 9, and again, having not a great time at school, not a horrible time, but just not good at sports, not great academically, so just not feeling particularly special in any way, and just, not very happy, I suppose, in that way. So it was a friend of my mum and dad's, called Sue, suggested to them, why doesn't he audition for David Copperfield, this BBC adaptation that was happening. And I, with no thought of me getting it, as just a thing of, this would be something he could do, which other kids in his class won't have done. That's a unique experience for him. Won't that be fun? And then I got it, and then it sort of all went from there, really. I mean, I now I can't imagine my life in any other industry.
Well, another question. Did you first hear about the Harry Potter books the way the rest of us did when they came? I mean, how did it, what was your first introduction? Did you read them?
I wasn't a big reader at all when I was younger. My dad read the first 2 to me, and I enjoyed them, but didn't really follow through and read the rest. So I wasn't kind of swept up in it the way everyone else was. And even then, I had that slightly belligerent mindset of everybody else is loving it, I'm not going to read them. Even when I was 9, obviously I got the part and read them and devoured them, and then I am that kind of example of a kid who didn't read much, read the books, and then just started to have a real appetite for literature, and I am that story of Harry Potter got me into reading.
Well, I think you've probably had to do this a million times, but I would like to ask you if you wouldn't mind just to take us back to this night. I believe it's in 2000 when your father takes you to the theater.
Yes.
And in front of you are 2 interesting people, and what happened that night?
Yeah, I mean, it's the story that has been kind of romanticized over the years. My dad was a literary agent in England, and through Norma Heyman, who is David Heyman's mum, who produced a film called Gangster Number 1, which my dad represented the director, Paul McGuigan. So there was kind of a connection to David Heyman through my dad to me already. And Chris Columbus had wanted to audition me because he'd seen David Copperfield. At that time, the deal was that it would be filmed over, you would sign up for the entire series, and it was all to be filmed in America. My mum and dad went, that's too big an upheaval to his life, you know, no. And I didn't know that any of that had happened, and nor should I have. And then the deal had. Then we had the night in the theatre where we went to see a play called Stoned in His Pockets, and there were these two men sitting in the row in front, and one of them was continually looking back over his shoulder at me, and I had no idea why. And it turns out, I later found that that was David Heyman and Steve Clovis, the screenwriter, who had come to the theatre that evening. I don't believe in fate, but very fortunately, my parents do. So they sort of saw that as maybe being a sign that they should at least let me audition. And it's. I'm, you know, feeling like I'm kind of talking myself into believing in fate now that I'm telling you that story out loud. But yeah, it was, and then I had my first audition, and I came to the process very late. I think Emma and Rupert had both had about 6 or 7 auditions by the time I came into it. I only had, I think, 3 near the end, because I think I auditioned for the first time in maybe late June, and they started filming in September, so it might have been a matter of desperation.
By the time you were permitted to go and audition, they had decided they were going to do, you were only committing for 2?
We're only committing for 2, but yes, that was the other part, is by the time that evening in the theatre happened, the deal had changed so that it would be signing on for only 2 films, and they were both going to be filmed in England.
Interesting. Okay.
So that was, yeah.
So how did you find out you got the part? Where were you? What happened?
I was in the bath, and as I have said many a time, it is true. I was in the bath, and my dad came in and told me the news, and yeah, it was I was just very happy. I had no idea, you know, I'd done well. I didn't know any of this would happen. Like that was it. That was all it was about. I was really pleased. Oh, I must have done well in those auditions then. That's good. And yeah, and that was that. And my reward, and the thing I requested that night was then, well, does that mean I can stay up half an hour later so I can watch the post-Watershed version of Fawlty Towers? Not that there was anything different from the pre-Watershed version. It just started at 9, and that was exciting.
So as the process began to move along, J.K. Rowling at one point said, quote, "I don't think Chris Columbus could have found a better Harry." How important was it to you to have her blessing and endorsement like that?
Well, very. I mean, you know, it's her character. I always, when I hear actors say things like, I don't know about, you know, if my character would do that and things, I always think, when did it become your character? You didn't write that. So that, I mean, you know, I've always felt, you know, you know, it's her character, and I have always felt a duty to her, and you know, whenever she tells you that you're doing well, and that you know, she sees the film and she thinks, and she comments on a specific moment or something, it was always very, very gratifying to know that, you know, we had her support. But she was always so supportive of the series and all of us, and also very, you know, she knows how good the books are, and she knows that nothing the films could do could ever debase that in any way. So she's, I think, very comfortable with the idea of films being made, and has always been very supportive, and you know, will be there as much as we want her to be there. But you know, she doesn't feel like, you know, a presence on set. You know, she only came out for a few visits. It wasn't like the author standing over the director making sure everything's okay. It was nothing like that. She was always just very, very excited by the series, I think.
So the first film is completed and comes out, and is this tremendous hit, which I think people, you know, knew that it had a built-in fan base, but it really exceeded even the greatest expectations that there were at that time. For you, what was the experience like of seeing the first film for the first time, and you know, what did you make? How did things change once everyone else saw that film?
It didn't change a huge amount for me immediately. I remember feeling very, very proud. I think the first one was the first and the last ones were the only times I've cried watching the film, because I was very, very proud the first time, and the last time as well was, you know, a very emotional moment. But we were straight back into work. I mean, we had started filming the second film before the first film had come out. I mean, I don't know if there may have been a month in between, and we started doing what was euphemistically called pre-shooting, which was just 2 months of regular production, but under another name. We shot the whole flying car sequence during that time. Then halfway through that, came over for the premiere of the first film. Then went back. So it was straight. I mean, that's what I mean. It's always very hard for me to talk about my experience of the Harry Potter phenomenon, because I really don't have one. My experience of it is of the work and of what was my day-to-day life. But when you're surrounded by it and you're just doing the work all the time, you don't really ever sit back and see, what an expansive, global phenomenon it really is. It's sort of a case of not being able to see the wood for the trees. I mean, you when you're in that environment every day, it just becomes such a routine, and never one that you got bored of, or it was always very exciting. But people would expect, I think, that I would have a real take on the phenomenon, but I don't, because I really have, my experience of it is a very, very personal one.
I guess on a personal level for you, though, at some point you had to realize that you no longer walked out of your house to nobody knowing who you were, very few people. And I guess I wonder, when was the first time you realized that you were now a very famous person, and how did you deal with that? It's got to be a jarring change.
I suppose the moment that it is kind of rammed home to you is the first premiere. When you get out of the car and you are hit by it is a wall of noise, and it's something that you never get used to. It's still very intimidating, and yeah, I suppose that was the moment that you go, oh, I guess people are going to be interested in me from now on, and yeah, I mean, it's not something you particularly get used to. It's very strange to me still that people are interested in me. And that I forget, because it's just my life, and I've had a wonderful life, but I don't automatically assume that everybody else is going to be interested in my life, but invariably they are. It's a strange world that you live in once you become famous, because, I hate using the word famous, but that's what you are ultimately when you do all those premieres and your face is out there. But it's also quite a slow process, because you don't walk out the door one day and suddenly it's like that scene in Notting Hill where you just have hundreds of paparazzi. It's not like that. It's a very slow process of one person will recognize you every so often. And so, maybe if you're going to a crowded place, maybe start to wear a baseball cap. And then it just kind of escalates. So, not that the disguises don't get ridiculous the longer you do it. But, it's something that you just, it's not a case of you wake up one day and go, oh, right, I need to, be careful about where I go, or, it doesn't happen like that. It's quite a slow, gradual process of realizing, okay, I have to, I'm going to be recognized from now on.
I think that everyone would agree that the dignity and the class with which you have dealt with it has been really amazing, especially when you think about the way a lot of other people have handled even lesser degrees of hoopla around their lives. And so my question, is there anything, though, that today you would like to go back and say, if you could have advised 11-year-old Daniel Radcliffe about what you were getting into, how to go about it, is there anything that you would tell him?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I'm proud of the way I've, gone through my life, and I don't think I have, obviously I'm a teenager, so there's a ton of stuff I regret, but that's, I've benefited from all of that ultimately by learning from it. So no, I don't think there is any advice I would give myself other than try and shorten your signature. Your handwriting's terrible anyway. You don't need to scrawl your entire name. But no, other than that, not particularly. It's one of the things I'm proudest of the film series is how we all maintain, and it was about, but it's reflective in not just the fact that we didn't all suddenly stop caring about the work and go off the rails and all those things that people expected or feared would happen. It comes from the fact that we always cared about the work because the crew always cared about the work, because every day when we went in there, that's what I feel this series is remarkable, because it's a huge multi-million-dollar studio thing, but which all has connotations and can, when you say that to somebody, can make people sound like, it can make it sound like it was just kind of a factory process of churning these films out. But there was so much love and care put into all these films, and it was because we all were growing up together. There were a lot of people that, not just in the cast but in the crew, that were there for 10 years, and so you've invested time in something and you want it to turn out well, and everybody, or 99% of people took a huge amount of pride in their work. I'm sure there were a couple of people for whom it was just a job, but for a lot of people there was a real level of care, and I think that we all knew that the way we conduct ourselves in our own lives, we are ambassadors for not just these films, but for all the people that work on them as well. I think we all took that seriously and wanted to do well at that part of our job as well as, do well on set.
The next couple of questions, I'd like to focus on some of those people that you worked with. I think the only two people in the world who can kind of maybe somewhat or largely understand the personal and the professional journey that you've had to go on would be, of course, Emma and
Yes.
Rupert. And so I just wonder when you first, if you remember the first time you guys met, and just did it click right away, and how did things evolve over these 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, we auditioned together. Once we did like a chemistry reading where they got us all together to see if that trio worked. And then there was, they auditioned with another Harry, and we auditioned with another Ron, or, so on and so forth. And what I remember more clearly than that is that our first photo shoot together, when we had been cast and it had been announced, we went and had a photo session with Terry O'Neill. Yes, thank you, Dad. And he wonderfully, throughout the entire thing, referred to us as boy with the glasses, the other boy, and the girl. and I think we all found that quite funny. And then the second thing, we flew up to Newcastle, to where we were filming near there, and it was I believe it was Rupert's first time on a plane. And we all flew up to Newcastle, and then from there we got a minibus to Goatland, where we were filming the Hogwarts Express stuff at the beginning. And myself and Rupert and Emma all sat on the back of the bus and pretended that we were running a radio station, and were just playing around. Because that's the thing, that whole montage of the films that you saw at the beginning, that's not, when I don't look at I don't even see the films when I see that. I don't, it's not about it, it's hard to say, because it's not really about the work. It's just about that was my life, and I loved it, and that was every day, every one of those scenes. I don't even see the scene, I see what was happening that day, what was going on. It's still very, very vivid. So it's just a huge collection of amazing memories, really.
I think another noteworthy thing about the series was that you worked not with just one very good director, very great director, but with a number. And just to go over that, Chris Columbus did installments 1 and 2.
Yes.
Alfonso Cuarón, number 3. Mike Newell, number 4, and then David Yates.
Yes.
And I just wonder, can you share any recollections about, was it very different from director to director, or I gathered from listening, I think, to an interview with David Heyman, that they actually went to unusual lengths for directors to work with each other to make that transition as smooth as possible.
I have some inkling that happened. I don't know a huge amount about what the directors. I know that they were always very, very open with each other, because all of them, other than Chris, knew what it was like to come into this world, and it's probably quite an intimidating world to come into. They all were very, very different. Chris Columbus, I don't think there would have been anybody better to start the series than Chris Columbus. Not only, I also have to say, and I always say this about Chris, no matter what people say about Chris, you will not find a crew anywhere in the world who want to work harder for a director than people do for Chris Columbus, because he is such an enthusiastic, energized, wonderful human being, as well as, he got 3 11-year-old kids enthusiastic and happy and excited to be at work every day for 2 years. That is no mean feat. He was a remarkable man, and also what I have to thank him for is I have now just I love film sets. They're an incredibly nostalgic, romantic place for me. I love the whole of the filmmaking process, and that enthusiasm and that energy is something that I learned directly from Chris Columbus. Alfonso is an incredible director, and I think it was the moment in all of our lives where we'd had those first two films and we felt suddenly more comfortable on a film set, and Alfonso suddenly showed us that we could be actors as well, and that we were ready to make that transition at that point, which we weren't ready to before. And and working with Gary Oldman on that film was also hugely influential on me. And Alfonso did something amazing for the series. I think it's probably it was one of the most important moments in the series, because he had just directed Y tu mamá también, and suddenly we went from being it was Lord of the Rings and Potter at the beginning, and Lord of the Rings was we were kind of the mainstream, not quite so cool cousin sort of thing. And then Alfonso came on board, and he took us in such a dark, different direction. And suddenly we weren't just another fantasy series. Suddenly, because they saw that David Heyman, our producer, whose idea Alfonso was, wanted to take the series in a dynamic, interesting way. And he did that and he made an amazing film. Book number 4 is huge and bombastic, and if anybody here knows Mike Newell, you will know that he is the perfect man to direct that film. He is larger than life. He is Toad of Toad Hall, and he is a fantastically funny, bawdy, super smart. I mean, and did a wonderful job on that film. And then David Yates, whose contribution cannot be understated. As I said, Chris Columbus is the man with the highest energy on the planet, and he could only do 2 of these. David Yates has done 4, and that is a huge commitment. And the thing I always say about David is that it's like he can see the entire arc of the series in one frame in front of him. He's an amazing storyteller and amazing at, particularly with finding details in the story to bring out, to highlight. I mean, he's a really, really good storyteller, and again, a wonderful human being. I've had the fortune to work with a lot of very, very good human beings, as well as being great directors.
Which leads into the last personnel question, which is that I think, unlike virtually any other film franchise that has ever existed, the rotating cast that joined you guys is unbelievable. And I just want to share a few names and then ask you to, pick a few if you can chime in on. But these people appeared in at least one of the Harry Potter films. Kenneth Branagh, Jim Broadbent, Helena Bonham Carter, Ralph Fiennes, Michael Gambon, Brendan Gleeson, Richard Griffiths, the late Richard Harris, Gary Oldman, Alan Rickman, Maggie Smith, Timothy Spall, David Thewlis, Emma Thompson, Julie Walters, and the list goes on. I imagine that made the process not only more exciting, but a lot more beneficial for you as an actor, right?
It was amazing. I mean, we were suddenly wanting to be actors and suddenly surrounded by the most amazing talents. I mean, the thing I think that sums up Potter is David Bradley, who plays Filch, who is one of the greatest stage actors of his generation, who played Henry IV 3-4 years ago, and he does enough. I mean, he's brilliant as Filch, but it's a small part. That's the quality for all the way through. I mean, even the smallest parts are generally filled by the most incredible actors, and we were surrounded by that, so we were incredibly lucky. I mean, I think the people who were the biggest influences on me were Gary Oldman, because he's fearless, and I loved working with him. I feel that just by being in the same room as him, the quality of my work was elevated immeasurably. Some actors have that effect on you. John Hurt is another person who has that effect, where you don't even feel like you have to. It's easy. You don't have to do anything. The performance comes out of you, and it's drawn out by that other person. Imelda Staunton is an amazing woman as well as being an incredible actress. You know, it is just an embarrassment of riches. We have, well, I mean, I think the only people, I mean, Judi Dench never, and Helen Mirren never, but I mean,
You can't have everything.
but other than that, I think we collected pretty much the whole set. And Ian McKellen couldn't because he was Lord of the Rings.
Right. I just have to say, you know, I was trying to think, has there ever been anything...
On a very quick side note,
Yeah.
Richard Harris used to always joke that the hat he wore as Dumbledore kept slipping off his head, and he said, it was probably made for Ian McKellen.
I was really thinking if there has ever been anything like this where we have watched actors grow up over a number of years in a character, in the same character. The only thing that I could even think of that's somewhat similar was the Andy Hardy films with Mickey Rooney in the 30s and the 40s, but it was not anywhere near the scope and scale of this stuff.
The only other thing that I had presented to me was the Antoine Doinel films, the Truffaut series of films. That is the only other time that you see one actor go from over that many years. Yeah, it's kind of amazing to be in that company.
Well, I just wonder then, you know, since you're more than half of your life, well, approximately half of your life is documented here on the screen in this character, do you when you look back at it, which you're very busy, I don't know if you have time to do that, but if and when you do, what occurs to you?
I'm not that masochistic.
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
But even just watching this montage, which I know you're able to see a little bit of, I know you said it brings you back to the day that you shot it and all of that, but as, you know, if you step back and think about the big picture, this is, you know, a large chunk of your life. What do you make of it?
I feel incredibly lucky. I mean, I maintain there is no more fun place for a 12-year-old to be than a film set. I mean, it is the world's biggest toy box. And I was in a very, very white, very kind of upper class, what we would call middle class, but you would call upper class in America. I've learned there's a big difference. School in London, and very privileged, and you know, in those kind of schools, everyone's kind of the same, and suddenly I was taken out of that and put into an environment with 1,000 different people from 1,000 different backgrounds, and I think it broadened my worldview immensely, and I met people there who still, you know, continue to define the person that I've become. And I just look back at it with a huge amount of pride and love, and you know, I'm, you know, don't get me wrong, I'm 10 years was enough. By the time we got to the end of that process, I was ready to move on and do other things, but I will never look back on the films with anything but tremendous happiness, and it was an amazing time in my life, and it will forever be amazing. I wrote on the card I wrote to everyone on the crew had a quote on it, which could kind of summed up the feeling, which was, I have enough memories as if I had lived for 1,000 years, and it's true. You know, I loved every second, and all the people I got to work with. It's mind blowing how lucky I have been.
One last Harry Potter question before we move on to the amazing other things that you've done, and the question is to do with the fact that you guys really went out on a high with this last one. Yes. I want to, you know, aside from the fact it got the best reviews, made the most money of all of them, it was successful by every measure. But you said an interesting thing to at least one interviewer that I came across while preparing for this. Quote, I think it, referring to Deathly Hallows Part 2, is just light years ahead of any of the others in terms of filmmaking, in terms of acting. It's like the emotional range of Shakespeare with the action and blood of Tarantino.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just wonder if you can expand on, you know, this final film, which is really still being celebrated now as things come to a close.
It is, and I was so proud of the last film, and I haven't been pleased with all of them particularly. I mean, I've been very and openly critical of my performance in the sixth film. I hated it. You know, I'm a very harsh critic of these films, but I was so pleased with how the last one came out. I found it hard to believe that we made it at the same time as making part one, because it's so far ahead of even of that. I couldn't have been more pleased with it.
Part 7.
But sorry,
You said same time as part 7?
7 part 1.
Oh, part 1.
Yeah,
sorry. I'm
yes,
sorry. Yeah,
I don't know. Some people call it 8. Some people call it I don't know. We filmed it all in one go. Yeah, I mean, it was the one that I really felt like I got somewhere close to where I wanted to be with it. So I was pleased that so many other people felt the same way about the film, and it's very hard to, and I know that there were a lot of very cynical people when the decision was announced that they would be splitting the book up into 2 films. A lot of people said, oh, well, that's to make more money, and you just think, well, if you all the people that made that criticism, I wanted to say, okay, well, you adapt it then into one 120-page script, if you feel you can. I mean, taking that time in the first film to, really set up the story meant that when we got into 7, because it's an action film, but David is having to tie up all these loose ends at the same time. Splitting the film meant that when we got to that last part, we could just go at 100 miles an hour the whole time. And it was, I was thrilled with how it came out. And I didn't know what I was going to feel. I was so nervous going to see it. I was just terrified. Because then this is it. That's it after that one. I don't get any more chances. So it was, I felt I kind of got close on the last one.
So, well, what I would like to do now is introduce a few clips that I think illustrate your versatility as an actor. And the first one, what we'll do is we'll play a clip and then hopefully, a question or two about it and then move on. But the first one's from Equus, in which you played Alan Strang, a stable boy who has a twisted interest with horses, in horses, we could say, without blowing it too much. And played it on West End and Broadway. 2 very, strong reviews.
It's always weird when they film stuff on a stage. I always want to say that at that point.
I think that should be the end of the technical issues, because I think the only way we could get that was on VHS. So that might be that. So yes, shows we got to keep up with the times.
No. But yeah, it's always I find watching myself very painful. I don't know if any of you noticed that. I don't enjoy watching or listening to myself. So if you see me cringing, it's perfectly normal. Don't worry.
So, in this case, obviously, by its nature, a very dark character. Also, as nobody lets you forget, a scene of nudity in the film. And I just wonder, was that part of any sort of a conscious effort to show that you could be very different than Harry Potter, that you were not just sort of the innocent guy there?
Well, I think it was a few things. Mainly, any 17-year-old actor who gets offered the chance to play Alan Strang in Equus on the West End, directed by Thea Sharrock, opposite Richard Griffiths, that's, I mean, I don't know what kind of career plan doesn't have that in it. So there's that, and there was, I think I wanted to do stage, and I know I wanted to do, and I had known for a while that I wanted to do stage, and I knew that if I did something even remotely kind of easy, then people were going to be very dismissive of it, and as one would expect. So I wanted to do something that I showed was serious, and wanted to do interesting work, and wanted to, I wasn't afraid to take risks, which I feel like I can't work unless there's a little bit of fear in the back of my head saying you can't do this, or this is or if I'm not worrying about something, or if it's not challenging, then I can't find the sort of the fight in me to do it. So yeah, and that was the same with Equus. It was a huge challenge. It was something that I was very uncertain of whether I'd be able to do, and it required learning a lot of new disciplines in terms of stage technique and projection, and Yeah, but it was great, and I learned a huge amount, and I still think that the most fulfilled I've ever felt as an actor was when I did Equus on Broadway over here. It was an amazing, amazing experience, and working with Richard Griffiths every night, seeing how he continually refines things, and how his technique is entirely based on listening. That's all he does. He just listens, and he's the best listening actor I've come across so far.
I guess the first, now you've been doing it for quite a while between Equus and How to Succeed. You've been, the 8 performances a week type thing, just the grind of it. Was it something that took getting used to at first? I mean, it's quite different. Well, maybe you can share the differences between film acting and theater acting, the biggest differences that stood out to you.
I mean, I have never, I don't think there is a huge amount of difference in what you have to do on film and on stage. It's still just about listening and being as real as you can, and just trying to have an effect on the other actor. So I don't think there's, and I think when you're in a theatre space, naturally you just learn to fill it. I don't know how that happens exactly, but you do. In terms of the differences, I feel like, because, well, first of all, when I started doing 8 shows a week, yes, it is a shock to the system. It takes a bit of getting used to, but also I love a challenge. I love having that thing of not wanting to miss a show. That's my big thing.
I was gonna say.
I have so far, touch wood, I have perfect record on Equus and here so far. So I'm desperate to maintain it. And so stuff, so stuff like that is very important to me, and I like the challenge of it. I like, there's nothing. It's very rare as an actor that you really feel you earned your pay. So it's on days like doing an 8 show week in theatre, you really do feel like you're earning your money.
Well, I guess that's as good a transition as any to How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, in which you are currently appearing at the Al Hirschfeld Theater until just a few more weeks.
Yeah, January 1st is my last show, so it'll be a lot of very hungover people saying goodbye to me.
I have to say, I was absolutely blown away. As I said, I saw it yesterday, and you mentioned to me, and I'm not surprised you said you guys were on, because people were really blown away yesterday. And I was particularly blown away by the fact that you have to be in unbelievable physical shape to do what you're doing. I mean, you're sweating, you're working that hard there. So please, how did that come about, and what was the big draw for you?
I mean, that came about during Equus. When I was in preview, Craig Zaden and Neil Merrin, who are the producers of How to Succeed, came back and said, so at the beginning of Equus, I sang very aggressively 3 commercial jingles. And I think it was in fact, I think by the time we got here, it was the Milky Bar was the only one I actually did. And so I sang the Milky Bar theme, and they came back and said, so you can sing? And I went, well, I can sing the Milky Bar theme. But they for some reason saw enough in that, and they said, well, we really want to do a musical with you. How would you feel about the idea of that? So I've been taking singing lessons for a while anyway, because I loved them. Dance is not something I've ever done. I never thought I would be good at doing, so I never tried. And the wonderful thing about my job is that it makes me do things that I wouldn't do otherwise. And so Rob Ashford, the director, who I met with through Craig and Neil, and he said, we discussed the idea of doing this show, and he said, I want you to be a triple threat. And I said, well, singing, I'm having lessons. Acting should, to an extent, take care of itself. But you will not get me to dance. That won't happen. Just please expunge any thought of making that happen from your mind. And he said, well, we've got a year, so let's see what we can do in that time. And so I started taking dance lessons, and I would do 3 hours on the weekend when we weren't doing Potter, and then when Potter finished, we sort of tripled the dosage, so we would do 9 hours a week of dance and 6 hours of singing, and you put enough hours in, eventually something happens, and there was never a point where I was like, oh, I've got it now, I look good dancing suddenly. It was mainly 11 months of fear, and then we got an early preview of some of the choreography, and I started learning it, and suddenly I was like, for the first time, just that month before we came over, I went, oh yeah, I looked good. For a split second then, I looked good. And that was it. It was a lot of training, and I do feel, you know, my proudest achievement, and I don't brag about stuff, but I have to tell you this because you have to know that this knowing me as I know me, I know how ridiculous this is. I'm an uncoordinated mess. And this year, I was nominated for an Astaire Award.
That's awesome.
Like, that is the coolest thing that may ever happen to me.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
I think one thing that should be noted is that just looking around the audience yesterday, and from what I gather from talking to people every night, there is such a diversity of people that come to see you. And from kids who are so thrilled thinking they're coming to see you because they know you in one way and come away blown away that you're capable of doing such a different thing than they ever imagined, to, you know, grizzled people who've been going to Broadway for years and you re-energize them about it. What is it like for you to sort of now, unlike the movies where there's not an instant response from your audience, you have to wait months and sometimes years, here you feel it every night, you walk out, and whether you like it or not, there are going to be people waiting to, you know, bother you, nag you about things and compliment you and everything. Is there something gratifying about that?
There is, and but that's the test. That's the test of yourself. You know, it's all very well doing it the first couple of months where you've had previews opened and audiences are full and it's a full house all the time and it's like a rock concert and they're screaming and laughing at everything. And then, you know, then the middle of the year comes and everyone who was really, really excited about the show has now seen it. So that's when you start to have to rely on, you know, the show being good enough to draw other people in. And, you know, obviously there is a huge fan base that comes with Potter. There's also a huge people who want to see a Pulitzer Prize winning musical. I think we're very lucky because we have a huge amount of young energy in the audience, which filters through to the grizzled people who may not be as excited about coming to the theatre. But I think there's a thrill of seeing people who clearly get on and have a good time together because we're a very happy company. And also, I think there's something very exciting and thrilling about seeing people working really, really hard and loving it. That's, you know, in Brotherhood, we are all, and it's not just me, it's all those dancers, all those boys are exhausted. We are sweating buckets, and, you know, but we're loving it, and it's a pleasure to dance. And I know there is a fairly good chance I will never get a number like that to dance in my career again. I mean, it is a really show-stopping, amazing number, and so I have to remind myself even more. And you know, because the things you learn about yourself is, you know, it's all very well when you have those 1,000 people audiences, but when, you know, can you do it? Can you still make it fresh when there's 500 and something people out there in a 1,400-seater house and you're hearing the echo of your own voice? You know, can you still find a way of making it fresh and fun and getting them to enjoy it?
Because for somebody, it's their first time.
Exactly, because for somebody, it's their first Broadway show.
Show very quickly a clip of Daniel's next film, which is The Woman in Black. It's going to be released next year. It is an adaptation of the book.
The Susan Hill book, which is also inspired
Right.
Now has been running for, I think, 22 years, the stage play in London.
Just, you know, one question, we were just saying one question about this, and then we'll take 3 from the audience, then you're free.
Okay.
So just, how did this come about? Is this something that it's been in the works for a while?
I read the script for this 4 hours after I did my last shot on Potter.
Wow.
We finished filming on, I think, July 29th of last year was my last official day, and I was on a plane to come to LA to do my first round of meetings, which I'd never done before, ever. It always surprises people, I've spent combined, I've spent 10 days in Los Angeles in my entire life. So Yeah, I mean, I met the director shortly after that, and we were on the same page and wanted to make not just a horror movie that would make people jump, but also something that was a comment on grief and, you know, a character-driven horror film, which I don't think there are too many of anymore. So in the mold of something like The Others or The Orphanage, and it was a pleasure to shoot, and it was so exciting to be doing something different. It really was.
All right, we have time for 3 questions, and we're going to begin. If you'll just wait for a microphone to be brought to you, we're going to begin in the back here. Thanks.
Hi. As was mentioned, the cream of British talent is in these films, and I was just in the Harry Potter films, and I was just wondering, was there a point somewhere along the line where that really hit you? Because you, at 9 or 10, you must not have known the resumes of all these actors, and I was just wondering, was there some point where you maybe it suddenly started dawning on you who these people were in terms of the history of British acting, and did that at all intimidate you or your colleagues?
Well, even on my first ever job, David Copperfield, which was directed actually by Simon Curtis, who's just directed My Week with Marilyn. With Emma. He came up to me on the day of the read-through. Now, on that film, on David Copperfield, we had Maggie Smith, Ian McNeice, Bob Hoskins, Paul Whitehouse, Imelda Staunton, like an amazing cast. And I remember he said to me, "You won't work with a better cast than this." and in any other case, he would have been right. And I remember the first time I met Maggie Smith, I knew she was Dame Maggie Smith, so I went up to her and I said, "Would you like me to call you Dame?" When I was 9, which I think she found very endearing, and I was in her good books ever since. So I don't think, I think that from a young age, having worked with people like her who I'd heard could be scary, but who, you know, I never found that. I was always very, and they were always really generous with us as well. All the adult actors on the films were always very, very generous with us and kind to us, and so it never really felt like an intimidating situation. I think the most intimidated I ever was when I first met Gary Oldman. I was terrified because I just recently watched almost all of his films when I heard he was going to be in it, so I was terrified about what I was going to find. But yeah, I mean, he ended up being a huge influence.
We're going to go to this gentleman in the middle. Yep, maybe we can just pass a mic down.
Hi, Dan. So you talked a lot about trying to find things that were really challenging throughout your career, and obviously working really hard to achieve those, which I think is a great characteristic. What do you think was the toughest thing that you encountered in your career, just like an adverse moment that you didn't think you'd be able to overcome, but that you were able to do in the end?
Well, I think I never truly believed. I think looking back, I think, how did I do Equus? How at 17 did I have the confidence to do that? And the truth is that I really didn't at the time. But I think a lot of the time, acting is just about staving off self-doubt and self-analysis for long enough for you to be natural. And that's what, I mean, Equus was hugely liberating for me, because I was tackling material that was, by anybody's measures, was seriously heavy, and to have succeeded in it in the way that I felt ultimately that I did, was an amazing experience for me, because that was a challenge. And actually, similarly with the dance, there was never really a moment when I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to be taken seriously as a dancer on Broadway. And so those are a couple of things that I definitely had real doubts about that have come good.
I would like our last question to come from one of our young people here, and I see one right up there.
There are 2 hands up. Both
oh,
here
okay.
and
Yeah,
we can probably do. We can squeeze both.
Sure. That's very nice.
Why not?
Okay, so I know you were 10 or 11 when you started doing all the Harry Potter stuff. So was it hard, or did you ever get to do any of that like little kid stuff where you got to like go to do book clubs and play sports teams and go to the movies with your friends?
Nobody wanted me on their sports team. Yes, I did. But I did get to do all that cool stuff, but I also got to do it on set, which it was like that was one of the cool things. I did all the same mad kid stuff, like climbing on stuff I shouldn't have been climbing of, and I mean, getting dirty. But I was just doing that in costume, so it just annoyed people a lot more than when normal children do it. It was, yeah. I don't think I missed out on anything. I just had a different experience of it. So while a lot of my peers, had a great time going to school, I had a great time, and I was still socializing and meeting, and I was still with young people a lot of the time, and people of my own age, so I didn't feel cut off from it in any way. But yeah, I don't feel like I missed out on too much, but I could still always, I can still do that stuff now. I don't think that'll look weird.
And this young lady, yep.
Hi, big fan. I was just wondering, what was one of your favorite scenes in the Harry Potter films?
To film or to watch?
To film and to watch.
To film and to watch. Okay. No. To film, the underwater sequence in the fourth film was pretty cool, just because I'll never do anything like that again. I was underwater for a total of 41 hours across a period of 5 weeks. I think the sequence runs in total at about between 3 or 4 minutes, and we averaged 8 seconds of footage a day. So it was a very painstaking process, and it was like I will never film that way again. And it is like when you film underwater for that long, it is just a submerged film crew, lights, flags, stands. It's a really cool experience to watch. My favorite sequence, I think, in all of the films is when Hogwarts starts coming to life in the last movie. I find that incredibly moving and really stirring. There's something about when those knights drop down. Just that, even now, that will get me, of all people, just like full of pride somehow. It's yeah. So that would probably be my favorite sequence to watch.
Well, I don't think we can thank you enough for making the time to do this. It's been great. It's really been.
Thank you very, very much for having me.